In the previous movies in this course, I've used variables of several types to represent values in my code. Now that you have a general idea of how to use variables in your macros, I'd like to go over the available data types in some detail. Excel VBA has several data types, and you can find information about them by going into the Help system, typing Data Type Summary, and clicking the article that comes up. This table shows the data types that you can use in Excel 2007 VBA, and they're pretty much the same for all the previous versions as well. You'll notice that there are quite a few ways to represent numbers. Byte is 0 to 255, integer is from minus 32,768 to plus 32,767, and so on. For most modern computers, they're fast enough that it doesn't matter what type of number variable you use to capture a value, but when computers were slower and their memory was more limited, defining a number as an integer instead of a single or double saved quite a bit of memory and processing time. That said, you should only use the byte, integer, and long data types when you're certain that the data used in the calculation will be a whole number. In other words, when the number won't have a decimal component. You can use the Boolean data type to store the results of a true or false test. The if worksheet function uses a Boolean value to determine which of two courses to take. So for example, this formula, which uses the if function, compares the value in cells C4 to that in C3, and if the value in C3 is less than the value in C4, then the product may be sold. In other words, it hasn't gone past its expiration date. On the other hand, if the value in C3 is less than the value in C4, that means the product is beyond its expiration date and it cannot be sold. So for example, if I were to type in 7/10/2010 as today's date, then the product can be sold. On the other hand, if I type in 9/14/2010, that value is greater than the value in C3, so you can't sell that product. You can also create your own conditional functions and return the function's result as a Boolean or a true-false value. I've done that here with a function that checks whether a value is divisible by 3 or not. It accepts any value up to a double, which can include numbers to the right of the decimal point, and it returns its result as a Boolean or true-false value. So if I were to go back to the worksheet and then enter equal is div by 3, and the cell value is C8, press return, and it says it's true. That's because 0, or the null value, is divisible by 3. You don't have a remainder to the right of the decimal point. However, if I were to type in the number 2, then we would get false. If I type in the number 6, which is divisible by 3, then we should get true. Going back to the help file, you see the currency data type. The currency data type is limited to 4 digits to the right of the decimal point, and it is used for calculations involving money. It has 4 digits to the right of the decimal point instead of 2, because when you multiply two values with 2 digits to the right of the decimal point, you get an answer with up to 4 digits to the right. That means you have to be able to work with those numbers, so they've included 4 decimal points in the currency data type. Now let's see what happens if you work with a currency data type, as we do here in the Calculate Exchange subroutine. This subroutine takes the value from sheet 1, cell C12, and multiplies it by the value in C13 on the same worksheet, and it displays that value in a message box. So I'll show you how that works. I have the British pound exchange rate, 1.47, and then I have a number of US dollars. And here is the answer displayed to 4 digits. If I go up to the macros dialog box, view macros, calculate exchange, and click run, then I get that same value. But now let's see what happens when I change the British pound rate to 1.477. In other words, so that it has 3 digits to the right of the decimal point. Well, the first thing that happens in my worksheet is that Excel rounds the value up to 1.48, and that's because I currently have it set to only display 2 digits in the cell. So I'll change that by increasing the number of decimal places, so now I have 1.477. And you also see that the value in C14 changed, except I have that cell's format set so that it only displays 4 digits to the right of the decimal point. If I increase it, then we get 5 digits. But now let's see what happens when I run my subroutine again. Because I'm using the currency data type, it only displays 4 digits to the right of the decimal point. So let's see if it generates an error or if it adapts. Macros, and run it. You can see that even though you use the currency data type in your subroutine, Excel still rounds the value off to 4 decimal places. The next data type I'd like to discuss is the object data type. So I'll go back over to the Visual Basic Editor, pressing Alt F11, and display the data type summary help file. The description isn't particularly helpful. It says that an object data type can take any object reference. An object variable is a variable that can represent objects such as workbooks, worksheets, or ranges. I'll show you how to use them later in this course. The final variable type I'd like to mention is the variant. A variant comes in two flavors, one that can contain any type of numerical data and another that can take any type of character or string data. Variables of the variant type do slow down your programs because it takes time for your computer to determine what type of data it's working with and whether it needs to assign a value another data type. As an example, multiplying two large long values together could generate a value that must be represented using the single data type. The data types available in Excel VBA let you optimize your code by declaring exactly what type of data each variable will contain. The speed of most modern computers means that your program's performance won't suffer too greatly if you make every variable a variant. However, if you go on to learn other programming languages, you will find that many of them do require you to assign your variables a type. So it's a good habit to pick up now.